Hello, everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by IRI Consultants. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit IRI at iriconsultants.com. I am Jennifer Oraquah, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. Now, human resources has long experienced an identity crisis. Are we overworked admins, or are we highly strategic business partners? Are we undervalued, or do we actually wield more power than we might realize? Are we none of the above or all of the above, and is that even possible? Today, I'm joined by Kate Tornone, the lead editor of HR Dive and Industry Dive, and for the last 2 years, her team has set out to try and resolve our collective identity crisis with their annual Identity of HR survey. 2022 survey has just been released, and I'm so excited to take a peek at it. Kate, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, Kate, is HR having an identity crisis?
A bit. The profession has certainly come a long way from its early beginnings. It has strategic roots, but at least when it comes to HR leadership, is so different now from just a few decades ago when it was more process driven. Mm-hmm. We've seen HR in some companies elevated to C-suite roles like CHRO, Chief People Officer, Chief Diversity Officer. And this is calling on pros in the field to become more strategic business partners who now have the CEO's ear, but that also means you have to deliver on the big picture now. So a lot of HR pros are still trying to figure out how to do that.
So HR's current focus is really on culture, on building positive workplaces and engaging and retaining employees. Has that always been a part of HR's focus, or is it just that we have more time for that now?
I think this is maybe where you really start to see that identity crisis. We're all here for our employer, to benefit our employer, at least at for-profit companies. And HR is no different. There's no getting around that. But HR pros are also people, and they care deeply about the people they work with. I don't think this is a new phenomenon, but I think it flew under the radar for a long time for a couple of reasons. We can hear directly from a lot more people now with the internet. So before it was HR professional organizations that were the voice of HR. And now we see HR pros on LinkedIn, on Twitter saying, that's not me. That's not my view. You know, they have their own political views and that they don't always align with what's best for the company, or at least what companies always thought was best for them. So, and then the other half of that is, I think in recent years, employers themselves, leadership beyond HR has realized that culture, engagement, things like that are really important for their bottom lines. It's just that it's a long game. So studies show that efforts like that really have an effect on retention, and turnover is really expensive. But it takes an HR person advocating for those efforts, going to the CEO and saying, look, this is good for the employees. It'll ultimately be good for you too. We see this all the time with things like parental leave and learning opportunities. It takes HR going to the CEO and making the case for that support.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to talk a little bit about the origin of the survey. When did it start? What inspired it?
So this is the second year we've done it. So it's pretty new. And, there's plenty of folks out there in the HR space conducting surveys on HR topics, hiring, benefits, compensation, things like that. And we report on those and they're really valuable, but we felt like we were missing information on HR pros themselves. So their demographics, what types of certifications they value, what they outsource, whether they feel like they're demonstrating value at work. So, and in other fields, you might be able to get that information about your profession from your coworkers or other places, but HR can be a really solitary job. Some of our readers are HR departments of one. And so there's a lot of things you can't talk to your coworkers about. And, you've got the CEO, but, they're probably also your boss too. So there's limits there. So we've just seen that HR pros are really hungry for information about their peers and their profession. So they're really, really active in Facebook groups. They make great use of networking events. And so last year, we started asking our readers and other HR pros these questions just to get a sense of how they see themselves and what their priorities are, so that we could share that out among our readers, but also have it inform our day-to-day reporting.
So I want to talk a little bit about your methodology. How did
Mhm.
you conduct the survey?
Well, it was purely an editorial endeavor, meaning, our marketing departments, our sales departments weren't involved, industry dives departments. So there was no sponsor involved at the front end shaping the questions. Just our group of like 5 or 6 journalists thought up these questions and
Mm.
created an online survey. And we asked readers to participate through our website and our newsletter. And then we also requested input from other HR pros across social media. Um, and the only incentive we offered was early access to the full results.
Mm.
And then once we received the responses, we actually pulled out a lot of people. So we only ended up with somewhere around like 400 that we went with for that we're doing a full report on and using for our reporting. But we felt, while it was really helpful to hear for our own education from others in related roles or fields, we really wanted to keep our front facing reporting focused on our core reader, the HR executive. So, um, we really narrowed the pool after the fact. And one thing we didn't limit though was geography. We typically only write for US employers, but we're increasingly hearing from HR pros that they're being tapped for global HR.
Mm.
So we thought it was important to hear from folks based in other countries.
Interesting. So what was the response the first year of the survey when it came out? What kind of response did you get?
Those response rates were about the same, like what we ultimately ended up keeping, like out of somewhere between like 400 and 450 responses both years. We would have, of course, like to have seen more growth, but we are really wary of some of the options for accomplishing that, like attaching incentives that the general public would be interested in.
Mm.
We just really wanted to make sure we didn't muddy the waters and leave us with results that weren't as accurate as we'd like. So we just, we felt like giving the information, the results itself as the incentive was a strong way to make sure we were getting HR pros who have thoughts on their field and want to hear from their peers. So, you know, we'd like to grow it, but I think, if it happens slowly, I think that's fine.
All right, Kate, I'm going to take a quick sponsorship break right now, but when we return, we'll dig into the details of the 2022 survey. Stay with us.
Right now, labor relations is changing rapidly, and it can be frustrating if the tools you're using aren't keeping up. If you spend too much time searching for what you need, and it's challenging to collaborate with your teams, it's time to think about your employee communication differently. You need a labor relations communication platform that will help you connect with and educate employees, but you can easily end up paying too much or buying unnecessary tools when you just don't have the information you need about available options. That lack of knowledge can leave you with an inefficient toolset that doesn't help you solve problems effectively. Proofbox solves these problems by offering a robust labor relations library of videos, e-learning, and ready-to-use websites at an affordable price point. Never worry about finding the right message at the right time. No matter if you're educating employees or supervisors, if you're in the middle of a union organizing campaign, or just in preventive mode, Proofbox is like Netflix for labor relations, and we even allow you to share your resources company-wide with team member accounts. Learn more today at www.bit.ly/proofbox and make sure your tools are keeping up with the pace of labor relations today.
I'm back with Kate Tornone, the lead editor of HR Dive and Industry Dive. So, Kate, right off the bat, you saw differences between the 2021 survey and 2022's responses regarding the top challenges that HR professionals are facing. Can you share that with me?
Sure. We saw some really interesting, although not entirely surprising, shifts. I think most notable was the fact that this year's top priority was hiring. Hiring was only third last year,
Mm.
behind maximizing value within budgetary constraints and culture. So to see it jump several places in one year like that was really interesting. But
Mm.
I guess it also really reflected what's going on in the job market. And HR pros responding to the survey also said that hiring was their top non-COVID challenge.
Mhm.
So that was a change from the previous year as well. So to have your top priority at work and your top challenge be the same thing, I guess it makes sense, but it also sounds really stressful. So that was one of
For
our big
sure.
takeaways.
For
Yeah.
sure. And considering everything that HR does in a day, it's no surprise that the survey showed an increase in outsourcing of some HR duties. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. We saw an uptick in every outsourcing option that we asked about, benefits, payroll, staffing companies, executive recruiters, except for one, and that was diversity and inclusion. So it was an extremely small drop. So it may be nothing, but it's something to look at in future years and see if there's a trend there. I think it'll be really interesting to investigate whether is that a cooling off from the D&I momentum that we saw in 2020? Or is it the opposite? Is it that companies have so committed to D&I that they're creating in-house roles for
Mm.
professionals in the field instead of using these consultants?
Mhm.
So we'll see.
So, do you think the outsourcing is a result of the tight labor market right now for HR professionals? Is that part of it as well?
That's exactly one of the causes that one of our sources suggested to us. Are
Mhm.
employers having trouble hiring HR pros, leading them to increasingly outsource work? Or, is hiring frozen as they prepare for a predicted economic downturn? The other possibility is that this continued shift from process to strategy broadly in the field, as HR becomes a more strategic field, things like leave administration, for example, may increasingly become something a third party handles.
So, another point made in the survey was the issue of our HR colleagues feeling undervalued. Where are we in 2022 on this point? Has it changed since 2021?
We did not see much year over year change here, which is not great news
Mm.
because we were not starting from a great place, as at least as far as HR pros are concerned. We asked respondents both about how employees value them and how leadership values them. So, speaking really generally, there was a slight increase in how much employees value HR, but
Mm.
the perceived value to leadership stayed about the same. So generally, there's work to do for pros in the field. One source I think put it best when he said to us, "HR has a PR problem."
Yeah, and I've heard that. I've definitely heard that before. Did any of the survey respondents suggest ways that we can better demonstrate our value?
So we didn't go that deep on our questions for the respondents. We keep it at about 10 questions, 10
Mm.
substantive questions, just to make sure folks will stay with it and complete it. But then we do follow up with sources in the field to try to add additional insight for our articles and our report. And so that source that said HR has a PR problem, he suggested the solution might be, or one solution might be storytelling.
Mm.
That HR pros need to find a way to explain all that they're doing to take care of people. They do so much behind the scenes work through good
Mhm.
times and bad, and it's often thankless.
Mhm.
So it's tricky to demonstrate your value when some folks may never like HR for a
Mm.
variety of reasons, and
Right.
B, you can't share a lot of what you're doing.
Right.
So it's tough.
Yeah. All right, I got to take time out for another quick break. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Orqua, and my guest today is Kate Tornone, the lead editor of HR Dive and Industry Dive. We're back. And was there an element, Kate, of the 2022 survey that surprised you?
So I would say maybe not exactly a surprise, but I'm really interested in digging deeper on the demographics of our respondents. We ended up with, I think, a really broad range of respondents when it came to age and years in the field, job level, department size, employer size. And maybe I shouldn't be a little surprised because this aligned almost exactly with research from other organizations, but our
Mm.
respondents overwhelmingly identified themselves as white women.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a handful of studies during the last few years that have indicated HR is about three-quarters women.
Mm.
And between what our sources tell us and just my own experience reporting on HR and attending conferences for the last 15 years, I have no reason to doubt that stat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But these studies, including ours, keep putting HR at about 65 to 75% white. And that stat, I think, maybe just needs a little more attention as we think about next year's survey. It may very well be an accurate representation of the field. Like I said, that's what other surveys have come up with. But my experience and the experience of sources we've interviewed has me questioning it a little bit. So it's just something I'm thinking about as we start planning for next year. What is it? What does our readership look like? Are we promoting the survey in the right places? Things like that. So maybe it is not accurate sampling, but I'd like to be more confident about that.
Interesting. And I was really intrigued by the survey's discussion of how lonely HR can be, that HR professionals are often peerless in the workplace, and we've got to rely on external networks and associations for community. What can we do internally to make our work more integrated and more collaborative?
That's a tough, that's a tall order. We've heard some great recommendations over the years on how HR can get to know its workforce and seek input for new initiatives and get buy-in for changes. We know the department can drum up support for a lot of its work by finding champions for a new initiative, for example. It can train managers to help with communication about benefits and compensation, but you can only go so far. I mean, the nature of the work is sensitive a lot of times.
Hmm.
And even when you can collaborate, you're still HR to everyone else. So, employee resource groups are often recommended to HR pros as a great place to get to know your folks, hear what's on their mind, and, collaborate with people
Hmm.
on, you know, how to improve diversity in your talent sourcing, how to write better engagement survey questions. But more often than not, you're probably not in the ERG, in the employee resource group. You're
Hmm.
going to the ERG for help. So, a lot of times that's just where outside context becomes so important for HR pros, a friend that you can text, a Facebook group where you can get honest feedback on something, or just even a few days at a conference where you can think about your own professional development.
Hmm.
It's just so hard to do some of those things internally.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this next question I'm going to ask just based on your interest in the data, but it's safe to assume that there are plans for a 2023 survey. Yes.
I certainly hope so. We're just getting started on our editorial planning for next year, but I would like to see it continue.
So are you anticipating any changes to the format or the questions, or as you alluded to a minute ago, the audience for next year?
I would like to think a little bit more about the audience. As I mentioned, we have other departments at Industry Dive that are really skilled at conducting surveys. So I may call in, some assistance there. But as far as the questions go, I'd really like to keep it as consistent as possible year over year. That was our plan from the beginning.
Mm,
And, we made only minor tweaks from year one to year two. And that's just so that we can benchmark and we can look for year over year changes.
perfect. So if we want to find out more about you, about the survey, about HR Dive, where can I go?
Sure. HRdive.com is where you can read our daily news and sign up for our free newsletters. And if anyone wants more information about the survey, there is a free webinar planned for October, and information on registration for that is on our events page.
Perfect. And I want to let everybody know that a link to the HR Dive website will be included in this episode's companion guide. So be sure to unlock that today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Kate, it is time for our lightning round questions. These are questions I ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right. Our first question is always a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about the identity of HR. So, in your opinion, which of these fictional characters experience an identity crisis more akin to HR? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or Bruce Banner in The Incredible Hulk?
Banner and the Hulk, because at least in recent iterations of the characters, they both strive for good. And in my opinion, they actually need each other.
Oh, I like that. All right. Next question. What's the best book you've read recently?
If I'm not at work, I'm with my 3 young children. So it's all kids' books these days. But one of my favorites right now is by an author named Ashley Spires. It's called Small Saul, and it's about a pirate of the same name. And he desperately wants to be a pirate, but doesn't fit the traditional mold. And, he's initially shunned by his shipmates, but they come to appreciate his differences and realize things are a lot better with him around. So it's a really great way to talk to my kids about both being yourself, but also diversity.
And I see some definite HR implications there. That's a good one. So next question. What is your favorite thing about the work that you do?
I always knew I wanted to be a journalist, so reporting and writing are my favorite tasks. But when it comes to this particular job, it's the team I work with. I have the privilege of managing the HR Dive team, and it's just a great group of journalists who are good people, and they really see the purpose in this work. They see that they're writing for a national audience and that each of their readers, these HR professionals, turn around and affect a lot of workers' lives each day.
Very nice. And next question is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
This is going to sound like I'm brown-nosing, but our CEO always says that the greatest threat to our work is mediocrity. So that's always really resonated with me.
I like that. So as a follow-up to that, who or what inspires you?
I'm inspired every day by the other journalists in our newsroom. We have more than 25 other dives covering a broad range of industries, but that means I get to see strong, innovative reporting from more than 100 other journalists every day. So it's just really motivating to share our wins with each other and to take ideas and inspiration from each other.
I like that. Thanks so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR, Kate.
Thank you for having me.
I also want to thank those listening in. Don't forget that we took great notes on this episode for you. You can grab those notes for free at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you're ready for your Project HR debut, our team is always looking for outstanding guests. Let us know about your expertise by emailing us at projecthr@iriconsultants.com. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to Project HR. A new episode posts every Thursday. Finally, drop me a line, leave us a review, or give the show a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's all for this week's episode of Project HR. Let's make it a great day at work.